took some time to talk to the tall gentleman who was here until the end of yesterday's sessions. Anyone here subscribe to economic principles? You should all subscribe to it. It's wonderful. David Warsh, yes. So David used to write for the Boston Globe, and then some years ago decided to conduct an experiment in which he would write a column that was a weekly column that was disseminated electronically, and it's called Economic Principles. It's wonderful, it really is. And I say this not because he wrote about the Summer Institute this week, although. But just if you want to learn about who knows whom and who's writing what and why, it's a wonderful commentary on the world of economics today. At any rate, this week's column is largely centered on the discussion that we had on Friday with Jim Buchanan and Mikhail is mentioned as having made an interesting question, or having an interesting question, and so on. So it's take a look at it. It should be available now. So I think it's published. So I would say
economicprinciples.com.
Yes, economic principles, and that's PALS.com. And I'm going to deviate somewhat from our published program today and introduce Daniela Parisi to you. You may remember that as David and I were thinking about this year's program, we asked for papers on foundations. We're quite interested in the role of foundations in as it relates to the development of economic theory and thinking in the 20th century. You'll see Dr. Now from Liberty Fund here, and that's partly a reflection of that interest as well. And David and I are going to, or David's going to talk about a conversation we had with Richard Ware earlier in 2008. Daniela, we didn't get a lot, really, the reason I mentioned that we asked about foundations is that we didn't get a lot of interest in, or papers offered to us in that area. Sometimes it takes us 2 or 3 years of asking for these topics before they actually sort of rise to a level at which we can put together a day. So we tried for, I think, 3 years to do Rawls and finally did Rawls, but it took a while. But Daniela, as you will know from some of her comments, has done some good work on the Rockefeller Foundation, and so I asked her if she wanted to just tell us a little bit about what she's found out.
Only 5 minutes. My research is with mainly 3 actors. Rockefeller Foundation, Svimez. Svimez is an Italian private non-profit association for the development of the industrial development of the southern Italy. It was started in 1947. And there are Smith, and the third Smith, better known as Vera Lutz. In my paper, I tried to make sense of what happened in Italy between these 3 actors in 1950, 1957. The period of the reconstruction and of the Marshall Plan was over, and in 1950 began the period of the development. And you know, all of us know that the 50s was the decade of the tough debate on development, on depression, on overpopulation, and all development issues. And I started this research, obviously, at Rockefeller Foundation Archives. archives, where I was working on other subjects. But I found a lot of documents on this novel, and I thought, why not? Why I cannot study this case? But I am very sorry Jessica is not here now, because yes, really, I stayed at Rockefeller Foundation several weeks, several years, a lot of days, and it is a fantastic place, and you find a lot of things. But then you go and you have to find the feedback of every documents, every items you found in the archives of the Rockefeller Foundation. And in Italy we have a lot of archives, not recorded archives, mostly private archives. A lot of families as archives, splendid archives, boxes full of sheets, and you have to dig and to find for feedback of documents well recorded in Rockefeller Foundation. And so I went to Swimet's archives that are well recorded archives, well ordered archives, and I went around Italy in 6-7 archives, and not no one before had seen these archives, and I looking for feedback of the documents found at Rockefeller and Swimet's. And this is very important because at the end, when I reconstructed this novel about this document, very important document, in Italia we call it Schema Vanoni. It is the first plan written in Italy. Schema. Vanoni is the name of the Minister of Finance who asked Swimet's to write this schema, this plan. When I finished my work, I thought this is the set I tried to reconstruct. I attributed a role to each actors, and I tried to render the intellectual context of the debate between the three. But I thought, I don't know how many archives I can find in Italy with papers of this same novel. And maybe one archive can change the construction. And this is to mark the fact that, yes, it is really a never-ending story, our work of historians. And you look from one perspective, if you see only the papers collected here, they are fantastic. But you have always the perspective of the United States, or a private foundation of the United States. And if you look at this, you have only this perspective. But every document has a writer, a sender, and a receiver. And you have to check. And this is, and so I worked 2 years to reconstruct this this very short period. In event, only an event in this short period. And this is a recommendation because we can. I found it's very interesting because you can read Smith in the light of Werner Smith, in the light of I don't know, Friedman, in the light of Marshall, and it is not sufficient Is the never-ending story. Okay, bye.
Yeah.
If you want to read my paper, I will be very glad because it's reading paper and commenting paper is the best side of our work.
Let me just encourage those among you who are thinking of working on foundations or know someone who's working on foundations. We still would really like to do a day on this because Danielle was right. It's very complicated and also important because it's one source of how we read or what we read and so on in foundations. David is now passing out here. I can do that, David. Some materials. These are the questions. So last fall we went to interview Richard Ware. I'm going to show a bit of the film as well.
Sure.
Who's now getting on as a very, very important person in the foundation world, and we thought it would be good to hear from him some of his answers to some questions that we thought of ahead of time, and so on. David is, of course, needs not much of an introduction to you because you've already seen him one. Let me introduce Jackie Rayfield to you, though, who's sitting near the front of the room. This is one of our students in the Jepson School of Leadership Studies, and she's writing about today. She also wrote about our work on Friday. And so if you look online at our website before too long, there'll be something posted about the Summer Institute, and you can hear what she will have to say. So that's just a word to the wise, Marcel, that you behave in this session. Because you're, no, I'm just kidding. But one reason I mentioned Jackie is that David asked me how long we've been writing together. How long have we been writing together? Okay, so he gave me the same answer I did, so it's always good to check. Co-author. No, I'm checking myself. And anyway, David's going to talk to us about our interview with Richard Ware.
One of the we had a day on last year on Warren Nutter. Warren Nutter was the co-founder of the Thomas Jefferson Center. Thomas Jefferson Center morphed into the Public Choice Center. Warren Nutter's work on the socioeconomic growth is enormously controversial. And the person that we most wanted to have to talk to was Richard Ware. He had been very close to Warren Nutter for many years. We don't know how long yet, but Warren and Ware in this will tell about how Warren Nutter became Assistant Secretary of Defense under Nixon. For those of you who don't know such things, that's the equivalent of a 4-star general. And then Richard Ware tells a story about how Nutter was there for a week and said, oh, this thing is falling apart. So you got me into this, you come down. So Ware became his chief deputy, which is a 3-star general. Okay. So, and so that the what we so we wrote to Ware, invited him down, and he said, well, to come, I'm too old. I don't travel anymore. And so, okay, and then we heard some very strange things at the Ware meeting. One of the things we heard, and this is the sort of the questions we asked, we heard in one of the talks, and this is sort of question 4, in John Moore's talk, he expressed the belief that Arthur Burns had the National Bureau of Economic Research finance the Soviet study because he thought there was too much agreement among Soviet specialists. There's too much agreement. This struck everyone in the audience as truly remarkable. He tells us about this. And so the idea was, okay, Arthur Burns is the head of the National Bureau and knows all about American economic data. Okay, and there's a lot of disagreement about this, that, and the other thing, right? So data's pretty good, lots of disagreement. The Soviet economic data is really wretched, and there's no disagreement. Disconnect. We've got, we got short tail data or something like that, and we've got something that's, something funny going on. So we had a bunch of questions. So we wrote a bunch of questions. Another thing which was on the circulating manuscript of the Buchanan Atomic Calculus, the consent which is Ware was on the distribution list. We asked about the Volcker fund, and so and then we asked Ware if he can't come to see us, can we come to see him? So
Where
okay, Richard Ware was head of the Earhart Foundation. He was one of the things people tell you. He was Ware's, as I had mentioned, he's chief deputy when Nutt was assistant secretary of defense. Ware was deeply involved in all the classical liberal foundations. And one of the things which I actually didn't know until we have to talk about it is his memory goes back to the beginning. That he was involved with the person, the man named Miller, who was instrumental in connecting Hayek with the Volcker Fund. So when Hayek was over on the tour out the road to Serfdom, the connection of Hayek to the Volcker Fund went through the person that Ware was with. From this, we have come to an understanding of where the Volcker Fund came from. The Volcker Fund started out as a foundation interested in municipal reform. And which explains instantly why the Kansas City address. They were worried about the great Kansas City political machine, land advance machine. So the Volcker Fund started off as interested in municipal reform. And so Ware comes out of the interest in municipal reform. So it comes out of good governance. And Hayek comes to America, and he opens their eyes to a large world around them. And so one of the people, and we've sort of taken the Volcker, we haven't asked where the Volcker Fund comes from. And then the sort of discussions that go on and that we've heard, there's a lot of attention to the Volcker Fund, and so our questions are that we ask questions to Ware about the Volcker Fund, and the answer was, well, you're just paying attention to the sort of the publicity hounds. Right alongside the Volcker funds are other funds that worked without any interest in publicity whatsoever, one of which is the Earhart Foundation, which is what finances this. Historically. There's another foundation, the Realm Foundation. And Ware was a high officer in both Earhart and Realm. And so that there was, one of the things we learned from the discussion is there was cooperation at the program officer level of the different foundations. So, and there was lots and lots of cooperation among the foundations. So just fixating on the Volcker Fund, just paying attention to the Volcker Fund misses the fact that when Volcker can't do something for one reason or another, somebody else will do it. And so you're looking at just the part that wants to be visible and not paying much attention to the parts that don't particularly want to be visible. well, you don't have any problem with the publicity, but they're just not, they're not interested. Not. And that, and so what, so that there's the reason, and so when you're putting together the other day, Buchanan said, where is the person you talk to? And Buchanan has had a personal relationship with Ware back in the 1950s. And so that it is one of the links to the foundation, we know the Thomas Jefferson Center go, and as it is, Ware's memory goes back to supporting Hayek in Chicago, supporting von Mises in Montpelier, because as you know, that neither Hayek nor von Mises was supported by, had a faint job. All the money came from foundations, and where it tells you one of the reasons that Hayek went back to Germany was that he had no pension in America. That he got some money he got some money every year, and that had never been raised. And because Chicago never contributed anything, he didn't have any university pension. And so he got a nice offer from Freiburg, but he wanted to move his library, and so the classical liberal foundations the classical liberal foundations arranged by his library to help include even online pages. So that's what it is. One of the questions we asked Ware was Walter Waken. This is question number 5. All the testimony that we've read speaks to the overwhelming impact which Walter Waken made at the First Non-Tolerance Society. Hayek has written how important it was for classical liberals in occupying countries to understand that there were liberals of integrity who survived the Hitler era. The role of the Volcker Fund in helping Americans get to the First Non-Tolerance Society is well known. We're trying to understand how Waken's trip was managed. Can you tell us about the Volcker Fund here? And so and one of the things we're doing in Denver is showing what sort of free market economics, if you can call it that, looked like in the early 1940s, before the Non-Tolerance Society. What was the situation on the ground in the 1940s? And that was sort of our last question here was Orville Watts' teacher, the name most I think you will not know, so sort of a minor functionary in sort of a free market establishment. Orville, well, it was important enough to have his book reviewed by Sandra. So if you can find all sorts of things about Watts in JSTOR by searching on Samuelson's author and Watts. Orville Watts' teacher, Thomas Nixon Carver, seems to have had a considerable influence on Leonard Reed. Leonard Reed is the president for many, many years, sort of the organizer of the Foundation for Economic Education. Carver seems to have largely vanished from people's memories. Is there anything you can tell us about his influence? And so one of the things we're sort of picking up on our sort of, I want to say archival research, because what we're finding is not in the archives. It was once upon a time possessed by people who worked for the organizations that had the archives, but then was sold after they died. And so it's not exactly archival stuff. It's stuff that is in proximity to archives. And so that one thing that you can do on the internet, on bookmarking the internet, is you can look for association copies. So you can drill in the things that were once upon a time associated with our comics. So these are the questions we ask. And then of course we have this, so we went up and Ware lives in Conway, Hampshire. So how to get there? Of course, well, we flew from Sandra came up from Richmond, and we flew to Dallas to Portland, Maine. A little travel glitch. We were hung up in 4 hours in Dallas, and so we were there 4 hours later. As a consequence, we have 3 interview sessions, two of which are filmed with home movies, and as well as backup iPod recordings, real high-end stuff here. And then we had dinner, at which we just recorded on the iPod, and that. So I can show you a little bit about how the starts, and then I pulled out some the sections from the transcript we had made of the interviews, and just things that they sort of and we get all the right permissions and that sort of stuff, and we'll start circulating it. We'll sort of give you a preview of what we've got to work with, and we'll show you some of the things that surprised us. And so let's see if I can get this working. All right, that's.
There's a letter in here. A Xerox copy of the letter. Dated October 22nd, 1963. Dear Warren, many thanks for your kind invitation of September 24. This autumn is too tied up for me to take the trip to Charlottesville. Could we fix it for the spring? Your name and your work are very much on my mind these days. Our loyalty to the notion that key Soviet sectors were subject to deceleration, a loyalty we both pursued against the views of the intellectual establishment, appears increasingly to be vindicated. Should you come this way, I should very much like to chat with you. All the best. Signed, Walt Rostow. I tucked that in the book the minute I got it, and I kept it there.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
W. Rostow.
Did he ever write that up?
I don't know. I don't know whether he ever. The relationships of Rostow and Nutter were always good.
Oh, that speaks well for both of them.
Because he worked. Walt was with Lyndon Johnson as the national security advisor, and that wasn't that much long before Warren was in the Defense Department, and. They communicated from time to time. I was not privileged or party to their conversations. Warren never reported, or just we'd seen him or talk with him.
Did Warren send you the letter then?
Hmm?
How did you get the letter?
I suspect Warren must have given it to me. there's no other way I would have had it. It's a Xerox
Yeah.
of the actual letter. Mess of papers here. It's on Department of State letterhead.
How interesting.
Counselor and Chairman, Policy Planning, State. And it was addressed to Warren as Associate Director of the T. Jefferson Center, Virginia. But this book created a big to-do. And I really don't know why. You look at the conclusions and some parts of it, it's not all that earth-shaking, but it tended to go contrary to the prevailing orthodoxy, which was the real reason for the controversy, I think. Not that it was a world-shaking change. It is, Warren, as it's turned out, he overestimated. He wasn't pessimistic enough about it. Your question about Burns. The prevailing orthodoxy was, I assume, that Burns was concerned about was the high rating of the Soviet economy's performance. And what John Moore says he thinks has occurred makes sense to me. Having known Arthur, he was known as King Arthur.
That's funny. To his face.
That's all right.
Well, we gotta go. It's all on tape. It's big broadcast.
Arthur Burns I had great respect for. He was very, very solicitous of me as a person, and he was very helpful to Realm and Earhart Foundations on a number of issues, particularly in opening the door with some people, I think overseas in particular. He went to Japan on a trip, and we began to hear tales out of Japan of some people in Tokyo who were Hayakian. And I began to wonder, what's this all about? And Arthur went to Japan on a lecture tour, and I called him or wrote him before he left and asked him if he would find out what was going on. Well, he found out it was Chiaki Nishiyama.
Sure.
Who was Committee on Social Thought, PhD, under Hayek.
Right.
And had been an Earhart Fellow. And that began a whole lot of support. The foundation went to Japan, but it was Arthur who made the exploration for me and came back with a recommendation. And the trustees of the foundation, anything Arthur Burns said was acceptable to them, almost without any equivocation. And Arthur was the one who sponsored me for the Cosmos Club, things like that. His son, who I don't know where he is at the moment, he's here, he's in the States, and does he teach?
I have never met him.
He had an Earhart Fellowship. So what Arthur, he was always digging around for information, and he was interested in exploring things. That was really his life. As a scholar, I mean, he was a pretty good one.
It's a very fine one.
And I think it fits with what I know of him and my relationship with him. He would raise a question about it. The other person who would particularly would be a George Stigler. George always was asking questions. And if you were a student of his, I guess you lived in Holy Terror.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Where either
Yes. Yes. I certainly was.
George was a wonderful person, and again, a person I had a lot of pleasant relationships with. And I'm no scholar, but you got along well with George if you didn't pretend to be what you weren't. All you had to do was be yourself and be honest,
Right.
and he would accept, even if you were stupid.
Right.
And a man of enormously broad learning.
Right.
You know, you read his book, someone would get to life.
Absolutely. Well, let's see. One of the things that concerns us is this broad learning is going out of economics, and it makes it harder for economists to
Well, you mentioned that in your
to have an influence in the world, because we're just not connected anymore with them.
My left ear off talking on the phone. I've been using these gadgets for about 5 years. I bought them when I found out I was voting on things in meetings and I didn't know what I was voting. That's dangerous.
How big's the meeting?
Particularly up here in Yankee Land.
Yes,
Take full advantage of it.
I'm like Washington, D.C., huh?
Yeah. But there's another, you know, I was Warren's principal deputy in the Pentagon, and whatever he wasn't on duty, I was acting assistant secretary. So I occupied a fairly important position in the hierarchy, because the assistant secretary's rank is 4 stars, and the principal deputy is 3. And the Air Force Chief of Staff asked me what I did in World War II, and I said I was a tech sergeant. He says, "You've had a hell of a promotion." I said, "Yes, sir." But one day we decided, I think probably Warren decided, it'd be kind of interesting to have the CIA come over and give him a briefing from Soviet economics. This was 1970. And so he told me that I was doing it. He asked me to be present. So I was, and I forgot who it was who came from what I always call a pickle factory, named after the original. And I think his name was Smith. There were a whole host of Smiths for some reason in the CIA. But this guy came and gave a briefing that in effect would have been the same briefing given before this book was written. Now, Warren and I sat there and could not believe that a CIA bureaucrat would be so stupid as to come in and give a briefing to the major critique of Soviet productive capacity and its progress and so forth, as if the book had never been written. Warren sat there and neither of us said anything. We just listened, and when the guy was done, we thanked him. And he left. And Warren looked at me, and I looked at Warren and says, "Did you hear that?" We couldn't believe it. And that was the prevailing way, orthodoxy, even then, in the agency with Soviet economics. I don't think they came anywhere near predicting the collapse. I haven't gone through what was publicly said about it at the time from the agency, but they sure, at least the Soviet desk was not on the wavelength at that time.
We're working on the projections or forecasts in American economic textbooks through it was in the mid-'80s. And it's embarrassing. Absolutely embarrassing. They sort of, by the time the 80s come around, it's sort of, well, they're not growing as fast as they used to, but it was just, there was no recognition that the forecasts, the projections was just wrong. They're just simply, oh, bad weather, people are working less hard. So it's as if Nutter stuff had never been done. Yeah. And we had at our summer program, it wasn't on the Nutter Day because the schedule didn't work out, but Richard Lipsey came from England, he was from Canada. And Lipsey's very well connected. He was criticizing people for overestimating the Soviet Union. And he'd never heard of Nutter. He did not know Nutter's work, so somehow it was just simply, it was so foreign from orthodoxy.
Was it reviewed in the
yes.
professional journal?
Yes, and this is the puzzle. I think it was reviewed, and it was reviewed respectfully. It got respectful reviews. But it just didn't make a dent.
The only reviews I have is Research Institute on Communist Strategy and Propaganda. It's initial RAB. I don't know who that would be. The Growth of Nutter's book reviewed. Yeah. I don't know who RAB was. Mm-hmm. It's a favorable review. Right. And I have the National Review, Colin Clark.
Sure.
Which is a very good review.
Of course.
And he had done some work similar to Nutter's and talked about it.
That's right.
And those are the only two reviews I've got. This is other one. No, this is Warren Brooks, down deceased, who was an excellent economic commentator. How the CIA overestimated the Soviet economy. And it's really citing in the work of Charlie Wolfe and Henry Rowan and Rand. And then I'd forgotten that John had this rather substantial piece published in New Institutional Economics, Eastern European Reconstruction Progress.
So that the stages of economic growth that Nutter was advisor to Goldwater, assistant secretary for Nixon, and Rostow was advisor to President Kennedy and advisor to President Johnson. And so that you think, okay, one's Republicans, one's Democrats, they have very different views, and Nutter goes after Rostow for saying silly things about central planning, but okay, yeah, whatever, that's true. But on this stuff, they're very much in court. And so, but one of the things that I've got some, we should show you some other stuff. We've got transcripts on PowerPoint. But I think one of the things that just came was absolutely blinding revelation was Arthur Burns' role.
So we what?
Arthur Burns' role. We think of Milton Friedman as sort of the most important of the classical liberals of that era. But who's doing things for the Realm and Earhart Foundation? It's Arthur Burns. And so that Burns is and this is actually sort of speaks to the puzzle that Kevin's had is that when President Reagan was elected, both he and Friedman wanted to have President Reagan start something on constitutionalizing money. This is something that, okay, you've got President Reagan now, somebody's very influenced by classical economists, okay, let's go to constitutional money. And Buchanan has told me that, there's one person who wanted that. One person said, no, we're not going to do that, and that's Arthur Burns. And so the question is, where did Arthur Burns get the connections to block Friedman and Buchanan? And so the only one-man answer is he's got connections that go back to the beginning. So Burns is one of the missing.
Back where?
Back to the beginning. Burns has connections which are enormously deep. And so that you sort of think it's all Chicago. No, it's not. There's older things in Chicago. There's National Bureau. And I forgot, that when Mises came to the country, the first 4 years he had National Bureau money, which is to say Arthur Burns. And so that, and so that if we think about everything being Chicago-centric, we miss the larger picture.
But it's not like National Bureau and Chicago are not unconnected in the 30s and 40s. I mean, the people like Dan Rutherford and others have shown that already.
Absolutely.
Nutter was very favorably reviewed by National Bureau from the start.
Right.
So I mean, these can be a shared stream, and
that's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But it's sort of the hagiography of the period, from a classical liberal perspective, Arthur Burns is not in the big picture.
Well, and if you listen to Jim, they're very much oppositional. So Jim doesn't speak the way Ware speaks about Arthur Burns, partly because of the money issue. He's a little more antagonistic.
A party for the money, a party for what? Because the other party might be
because of
interested.
the money,
Right.
the constitutional money. He sees Burns as having blocked that. That was an idea that he very much thought would go forward,
Yeah.
and it didn't. And he puts the blame for that largely on Arthur Burns. So if you just listen to that conversation, you think that there's deep opposition amongst the foundations, which in fact didn't exist. There's sometimes opposition, and some of it's on a personal level, and some of it's on specific issues. But in fact, Burns was much more helpful to Earhart than we might have expected going into the interview.
there's also, one of the things we're trying to get at is the sort of Warren Nutter passed away relatively early in his life, and at an early age, and that his so there's been a tendency in which Jim Buchanan warns us about. Every time Buchanan talks about the founding of Thomas Jefferson Center, it's always he was co-founding the Center. So Jim is not trying to, Jim, it's Nutter. It's Buchanan and Nutter. It's not Buchanan. It's Buchanan and Nutter. He's saying that, and people tend not to pay attention because Nutter's not the room to say it. And so and one of the things which is clear, Buchanan is very clear on this, is Nutter was not overly enamored of public choice stuff. He particularly didn't like this sort of politics of exchange. Which I guess is, given that working on the Soviet economy and then doing Defense Department work, that politics of exchange probably makes a little bit less sense than politics of power. It's sort of Nutter's approach. And so that it's not just public choice. It's sort of the classic, Thomas Jefferson Center has got a larger classical liberal vision. Part of it was removed with Warren Nutter's early passing. And so we lost part of that tradition. And that one of the things we're trying to do is to try to get that back. To try to like both archival work and then asking questions for people who were, and as you can see, the reason Richard Ware doesn't travel has nothing to do with can't function. He actually drove us to dinner, which was a little more exciting than we wanted.
It was wonderful.
Well, the dinner was great. The dinner
drive was too.
David, have you looked into how Richard Ware ended up in such an influential role? I mean, he's not an economist by training. He seems to have been involved in foundations from the mid-40s on. How did he become such a mucker? I mean, I can figure out how Doug became a mucker, but how did Ware become so crucial in so many different intersections?
Here we go.
Extraordinarily smart and energetic. That's part of it.
Well, a lot of people like that.
Yeah.
Some of us
You
never
won't
become
quite that
important.
smart and energetic when you're 90.
So you see there's a name that's lent up, and it's coming out of, where's it? Is the Detroit Bureau of Government Research. It's coming out of municipal reform. So it's coming out of, worrying about machine politics, and so it's reasonably distinguished credentials. And then what happens? Well, World War II is what happens. And then there's this so that there's, when I said the memory goes back to the beginning, that he was involved in the discussions for the first Bellarmine Society meeting, Ware himself was at the second Bellarmine Society meeting. He says he's the only person alive who was there. And so that, this is how it connected.
So what is his age?
93, isn't it? About 90.
Yeah.
And, talk to us and say, ooh, if I'm that sharp when I'm today, I mean.
He lives alone, in the middle of nowhere. And his wife died just recently, and he keeps this house going. It's an old rambling house filled with books. 2,000 books, I think he said he has.
And a cuckoo clock.
Yeah.
Very loud cuckoo. Very, very big. So,
Just before the picture, I want to have the picture, but you said a lot of books. What kind of books? Have you had a look at it?
We didn't go look at them, no, they're upstairs.
Oh,
Well, they're
okay.
all around.
They're all around.
But he has his main books, I think, upstairs. So all around just stocks. Has anyone here been to David Levy's office?
Okay.
His living room looks like David's office. Lots of books, and he's reading, many of them, a lot of them are open or have marks in them. And, some of them are bird watching, so, nature sorts of books, lots of historical books, things that have been written recently. So, he keeps up with what's being published and so on. And that's just what was.
Yeah, what you described there.
So, and there's this sort of connection. This is the Miller was the one who connected Hayek with Volcker. And so that, and there's, and one of the, there's something really interesting. This is something that, one of the things, I knew this, or I had heard this, but it was nice to have it, hear it again, is that when Hayek came to America, he wanted to go to Princeton. Why Princeton? Oh, it's easy. Jacob Ware was there. And so that, and it was not that Chicago was a second choice. That he would much rather go to Princeton because he hang on with Jacob Ware. A lot more in common with the line there in Chicago.
And the then husband of Vera Lutz was in Princeton too, and Vera Smith was the pupil. Maybe they knew each other too.
Yeah, that could very well be. And there's other people in the Mises circle there too. Morgenstern was there, so Morgenstern was in the Mises circle. I don't know if he knew Von Neumann, but he certainly knew Morgenstern, and so there are people in the Mises circle in Princeton. But one of the things for reasons for this project and for what you saw of the Liner project, we've got to spend a day or two, a couple of days at Princeton reading Hayek, Weiner, and what's but this is, and then.
Okay, so you can't get it, of course, from one interview, but it is very interesting to know more about resistance at Princeton against Hayek, I would say.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, one of the things it was the institute. It was not the department.
No, sure.
Yeah. So, but that's right. But so one of the things that Ware working with physically, it takes me longer to set up the camera than it does the iPod. So we got stuff on the iPod that we didn't get in this, and one of the things is where the stuff is, where his papers are. It's the Michigan Historical Society, and so everything that was said can be checked out with documents in the Michigan Historical Society, and so that, so one of the things which interviews will help is tell you where to look.
Yeah.
What I mean, it wouldn't. I mean, I could have spent the rest of my life very happily without thinking that there's another lost dimension. Just something that, and if in fact you actually looked in Rostow's books, the recent one, the last things, there's no reference to Nutter in the index. There's no mention of Nutter in the book Rostow. did after the 60s. There's just in stages of economic growth. The argument is driven by better data. So, you know, you miss that, you can't recover from lost hours and labor work. And so it's sort of much more where to look, and there's some, here's what Friedman told him about why Hayek was not hired in Chicago, and then there's somebody who mentioned, I was on the board, that people pay no attention to John Neff. Oh, John Neff was the guy that hired Hayek. And it's just this. So, services, I said, we'll take it, we like diversity. And so how did Hayek get to the committee on certain thought? Well, the department turned him down because he wasn't a mathematician or a statistician, and had no intention of being one. But the committee on social thought, John Neff picked him. So John Neff, and of course it's all external money. So the salary was 12,000. So what was the amount that Stigler was paying Co?
1,000 a lecture.
1,000 a lecture. So Hayek is getting 12,000 a year for and it never increased.
What year was that?
So Hayek was there 52 to 62. 62, 63, something like that.
But that's not a terribly low amount of money for the time.
No, that's right.
More than Stigler or Friedman was making in their first years out of Wisconsin, Minnesota. So it's not like they're underpaid.
Stigler about that time was making about 40.
In the mid 40s, he was making $4,000 to $8,000.
Yeah, no, that's right. But this is 52 to 62.
I think Stigler was making 40 and 52, but you know more about Stigler than I do.
Yeah, that's a lot of money for any professor to be making if you look at what the CPI was. I find that hard to believe.
Somebody was pulling that right there.
I think more than that, actually. I think it's a factor of about 7.
Right.
Okay, but those are the numbers. Those are the numbers. And anyway, so this is the sort of retirement age, and then you have the pension. So, and that's the sort of. Yeah, they look at this library. And so that one of the things the various foundations, and then the stories for Mises are even wilder, because it's 5 foundations are chipping in to support Mises. So you have Mises and Hayek who have, which they consider substantial profession, who can't get jobs, who can't get paying jobs, it's not where they want to be. And the private money is filling in the gaps. And so that they're helping. It's a lot of numbers.
There's a fan letter from Paul Samuelson. That's amazing.
Huh?
Yeah.
So again?
A fan letter from Paul Samuelson.
Oh, absolutely.
That's amazing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So the last.
Yeah. No, so when Hayek wrote his Voltaire book, of course, the wartime project, that when published, he got this gushing letter from Samuelson. And what just absolutely marvelous piece of scholarship this is, and would he please write the biography, write the life of him, write the life of Mill. Of course, famously, Hayek didn't. He turned the papers over to Michael St. John Pack, who was a perfectly distinguished paratroop officer. It is not a joke. And that, so that the Hack's life of the mill is not quite as subtle one thinks as what Hayek would have written. And that is, Sandra got the letter, as you know, it came from the Hayek archives. Bruce Caldwell sent it to her when she started early on. She's doing the new edition of Hayek's Bill Taylor book. And so he sent this to her as just sort of something that would be fun. And so that there's a, oh, and this is the Fritz business. This is you can't ask a similar story. Oh, this is great. So he wrote all this books out in German and translated them back into English. So it's wild to read in sort of the LSE archives, people writing to Dear Fritz, or talking about Fritz Hayek is in Chicago talking to Weiner, this sort of thing. He absolutely obviously despises that name. And so
is it that he despises the name, or he despises the person who's using it?
No. It's everybody. It's just everybody. Yeah, this is just something that it's a familiar term that people were not allowed to use.
It's a familiarity.
Yeah, unless you're Jacob Weiner.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Was the person using
Yeah,
it rather than the
that's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't know whether it was just something that is in a circle.
But also, I think it has to do with where he came from.
Yes.
Friedrich von Hayek. It's not just Fritz. Von Hayek.
Fritzy.
Yeah, that's not the Fritzy boy.
And the British stereotype name in the Second World War for the German soldier was Fritz.
Yeah.
And he was at the LSE at that time. Maybe that could explain another dimension.
Oh, yes.
That's
That's very true.
German because
That's
it's
very
not.
true.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. This is it. Freedom was great mind. You should have known this before he got married. Well, that's a big one. Here's a professor from you. So, 5 foundations.
Was there much overlap in people in these?
Yeah,
not many for David, but maybe there were a lot of same people.
Right, well, that's right. And then they were connected. This is one of the things that focusing on Volcker misses. They were connected. All the program officers knew each other very well, and so they were, and so that they could coordinate things. If one couldn't do something, one wanted to do it. Yeah.
FEE, was that New York then?
Yeah, that's Foundation for Economic Education.
I mean, they were already in New York.
They were in New York, that's right.
Because what I think is interesting is many of the other foundations you've mentioned, they're really sort of Midwestern,
Right.
Midwestern business-oriented crowd. This is a
No faculty.
right, and it's not surprising that there would be well connections because there are probably overlapping donors and overlapping social crowd as well. But is FEE as tightly connected in this period to the Midwest, or is it a different scene?
Now, one of the things we were talking about, he comes out of Los Angeles. And one of the things we're going to be talking about in our paper in Denver is about what was being published by the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, which is by Leonard Reed before it moved to New York. And it comes as a surprise to people. It wasn't von Mises. And so that, and I think it's going to, okay.
But that's a good point, that there is a real Midwestern.
Yes, I mean, I agree that the Moravsky et al. Are obsessed by Volcker, and that in a way misses a lot of the issues. But I think Moravsky's right to say that in the Midwest there's a lot of funding for.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. And this is, I think this is our last. This is the last slide, and this is about what this is going to. And I think that one of the things we're going to be talking about in Denver, and then talking more about in Prague and the leadership thing, is the sort of when Hayek put together the Pelham Society, the American delegation was heavily classical. There were 5 Knightians. Involved was Knight, director, Friedman, Stigler, and Henry Simon was going to be invited. So that there were, and then with von Mises, of course, and so that you have a very, very strong classical liberal component to the American Pelham Society. And then sort of one of the questions we're going to ask, look is what are the alternatives? What did American free market economics look like absent the Knightians and von Mises? So to know what the sort of marginal product of Hayek was, you have to know what the pre-existing free market going to be was. So, and if anybody wants to go, the paper's being circulated, so if you're interested about this, okay. Thank you very much.
Do we have any comments or general remarks you want to make? Yeah, there.
Yeah, so I actually conducted a mini interview with James Buchanan a few days ago because I wanted to know why he thought Nutter got into the Soviet stuff. Because Nutter wrote this piece on competition in Volcker-funded Chicago research. And then he went to Yale. And on Ware's account, there's sort of several interlocuting reasons. Obviously, Arthur Burns put Nutter onto this and gave him a really good contract. But it's also that he thought that Nutter knew that he would never get tenure at Yale and needed, as it were, an escape route out of Yale. And the third reason was, and this was sort of very interesting, is that he thought that Nutter may well have been CIA in World War II, the predecessor to CIA in World War II, and had done already serious research on Soviet capacities, and that when he started his project, he wasn't starting de novo, but actually already knew what he was talking about. And this is one of the reasons why Burns, besides all the other obvious reasons, this is one of the possible reasons why Burns would have tapped Nutter. So that would make the CIA briefing of Nutter doubly ironic, is that, But as Buchanan said, all speculation.
one of the things that is public is Nutter's attack on CIA. And one of the Nutter had this long fight with the CIA over Soviet estimates. And one of the things we didn't talk about we didn't have on our PowerPoints is that one of the costs of getting the CIA's overestimate of Soviet capacity was we sort of trusted Soviet CIA estimates of Iraqi capacity. And so that, so the question is whether, and so we talk a lot about this sort of, one of the sort of thing, one of the questions we asked about was the attack on Warren Nutter from the right. Warren Nutter was criticized from the right because he diminished the Soviet threat. And so
CIA didn't like his estimates.
Yeah, and so that the question is where do you get independent estimates? Where do you get independent estimates? And one answer is private foundations. National Bureau's got money that is not connected with CIA. It comes out of Rockefeller or something like that. So you've got private foundations that will let you get independent estimates. And of course, as Ware said, the funny thing about Nutter's estimates, which are so controversial, is they were over-optimistic from the...
Well, what's doubly ironic from that, the other major critic of CIA estimates was my old teacher, Franklin D. Holtzman, who was a committed Marxist, but said, listen, Soviet economy is not running on proper Marxist grounds. They have this devil's weird mixture, and because it's this weird mixture of planning and market, they're never going to have the efficiency gains they're claiming. And he also for years wrote papers on CIA overestimating Soviet armaments because he thought they could never possibly be that high proportion. And he also got systematically ignored, but they asked him to join the CIA board. He told me always, not because he thought they were interested in what he had to say, but because if he would join the advisory board, he could not say anything anymore in public.
This is a response also to Eric. I don't see how they got the good data. In Amsterdam we had Michael Elman, and he's an expert on Russian data. And the stories are always out the time he said how difficult, even for whatever, to get some kind of picture of what's going on there. So how did they get it at the BER? How did they get the right picture?
Well, we did an awful lot of original data work. There's one of my teachers at Berkeley, Gregory Grossman, wrote a National Bureau on Soviet production, and so they just try to they try to build data up from the beginning. They try to get this independent stuff as
But how did they get it? So what was the
source? Well, one of the things that's interesting, actually from a philosophy of science point of view, what Nutter is doing is he actually creates a model of industrialization, both high, fairly rapid industrialization and slow industrializations, and extrapolating from data from the 1890s and all the way up through 1917. He then offers several scenarios about what historically, how much time it took to industrialize. And then he starts relating to some of the official statistics that come out and says, well, even if the official statistics are true, things are happening that just, has never happened before, or they're going in the wrong order. So he has...
Yeah, but if these data is some kind of model data, some kind of simulation or what?
It is partly a simulation, yes.
Yeah, that gives some reason for a lot of these other institutes to somehow to doubt. Now we know that they were right, but that's by insight. But at that time, what could be the judge of these data to say you're right and you're not right? So that makes the story.
No, that's exactly right. There's nothing wrong with saying, look, here's one approach gets this result, another approach gets that result. And you know, they can't both be right. And so that there's no problem with that at all. That's absolutely.
What's depressing about the discipline is that there was never a serious debate either about the Nutter data or about the Holtzman data. It was basically.
I don't think that is true. There was a very, certainly in Europe, there was a very industry of comparative economic studies. The data were very well researched as far as possible.
What year does the serious discussion start in Europe?
In the 70s.
Well, but we're talking about the 60s here.
Well, okay, then in the 60s. That's the point. There was a very great interest.
You wanted to make another point at that point.
Yeah, it's a very different point. Yes.
Go ahead.
So I find this very interesting. I find it extremely good that you do these interviews, but perhaps also because it's a lot to take in. I'd like to have a bit more context where you take it exactly. So there is an interest in foundations. I hear these interviews, I hear different or interesting bits and pieces, but what is the kind of question that is driving you, if I may ask?
Oh, well, to be perfectly candid, I am, of course, an Earhart Fellow nominated by Stigler, so I can, and there's a whole class of problems I'm interested in. This is some of the things that puzzled us, and the sort of the idea was that, okay, let's go back and talk with somebody who may be able to guide us to the answers. And so, you know, I thought we thought it would be fun would just be show you the raw stuff. Just the raw stuff before we process and make it coherent.
Well,
I can imagine there are some,
So we're also interested in the Virginia school.
Yes.
Political economy. Where does it come from? How does it become influential? What are its sources of support? What are its intellectual roots? And so on. So we've gone back to Knight and all sorts of things. But as we work on that, it becomes important to think about the sources of support. And that's that broad school and the people who are in it and so on. And also, many of the important figures are at an age at which it's important to talk to them now. So though we may not really have a coherent program relative to this interview quite worked out, we thought we need to do it right away because we can't travel.
Yeah.
We want to find out more about Warren Nutter. We'll just go up and talk to him. And it was fascinating. You know, where we go after that, you know, I don't know that we're quite sure. But there's a bigger project behind it. Part of it relates to the Virginia School.
Maybe you can help me on this. I recall a long time ago reading a description of the reception of the A.W. Phillips machine in the LSE. And the person was explaining it, it might have been Lipsy, I'm not sure, said that everybody was very apprehensive about how it would be accepted, certainly Phillips. There's a lot of money and time gone into this thing. It leaked on the floor, apparently. I guess that's this Keynesian system is supposed to show the operation of it. I guess it had a liquidity trap. But anyway, they said they were really afraid of what Fritz Hayek would think of it. And then Fritz came and he peered at the thing, he tapped it with his pipe, and looked around here, and then all of a sudden he broke into a big grin, and they knew it was an end thing after that. So, but the guy who was talking about this, you know, kept referring to Fritz Hayek. So apparently that was, you know, that.
Well, all sorts of people called him that.
That's right.
Both to his face and also behind his back.
The German soldiers, that's really interesting. That's really.
The other thing we should say, though, Haro, is we have a big project that we've been working on for a long time on textbook, American textbook treatment of Soviet growth. And so that led us to that. So there's a big portion of these questions that has to do with Nutter and growth.
stuff in every textbook in the period in library economics.
Can you just about how did you get at this person? So there's some kind. It was not the first person you thought of. Oh, we must go. So there was some kind of.
Where?
Yeah. So what's the story that you? Because it appears to be a treasure, but you didn't know that before. But so how did you get there? So become.
Well,
we had known of him, of course, beforehand, and his name keeps coming up. And as we thought about the Nutter Day, Jim said, talk to Dick Ware. Jim says something, David, and I listen.
That's right. Also when Liberty Fund put on its Stigler memorial conference, I went to dinner with Dick Ware to talk about it. So that because I travel in some circles, that there are some names that resonate.
Yeah.
And so that, but I hadn't thought of it in the Nutter connection. I hadn't thought of it in the Nutter connection. Candace says, you got to talk to him. Where's the person you want to talk to? And then because of his memory is good, his memory is really good, and so that he's going to remember who I am, and so that we can write a letter, can invite to come up, and which because of my history, it's important to show the the raw stuff, the unprocessed stuff. When eventually we get to write something up, the question is, what kind of filter are we putting on the interview? So you can see what the
You edited out that cuckoo clock.
Oh, the cuckoo clock was John's. It was through the whole thing. Right, and as you've noticed, the second one was a lot longer.
Yes. Hey, Ron, you were there at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's right. So,
Stefan, you had to come.
Yeah, just a brief question. If I'm not wrong, it was precisely this 48 meeting with the Montpellier Society where there was the big clash on the monopoly question between Mises and Eucken. Did he say something about that?
This is why
What do both sides say in the clash?
Pardon?
What are the positions?
Well, whether the monopoly problem is to be tackled by an active antitrust policy or not. Eucken saying that it is important, Mises saying that if markets are open and the specific elasticity question, then it's a non-agenda for economic policy.
where is not an economist?
Pardon?
Where is not an economist? It comes out of political science, particularly municipal government political science.
Okay.
And so that these arguments aren't going to stick in his mind. There's no context. And so
We don't know that. We never asked him.
Okay, I'm off. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll have to go back.
Right.
That's right.
There.
Oh, it's fine.
But it was
Were Stigler and Friedman there at 48?
Yep.
I'm not sure about the
Yeah.
second meeting.
Yeah.
And if Stigler starts writing the monopoly stuff with Ware next year.
No, this is one of the things Sandy mentioned that we've had some difficulties in some days are easy to put together, some days we keep trying and it takes a long time, and one of the days we haven't had any success is the Robbins Day. We haven't had a Robbins Day, and so one of the puzzles is that what was Robbins' involvement in getting Lincoln to MBS, and what was Robbins' Robbins' involvement in getting away into London, and that Robbins had connections with the British government that Hayek did. That Robbins was in America during the war, working for Keynes, that Robbins had stature in the establishment that Hayek did, and so the role of Robbins in this sort of stuff is something that I don't know anything about, just absolute. And here, this is so Hausen and sort of what you could find out, some of the stuff you find out, the written stuff, it seems not to be right, that sort of the prehistory of the Mount Holland Society was a colloquium of Whitman, and it's written down that Robbins was there. Well, 2000 thinks now he wasn't there. He was scheduled to be there, but he was actually someplace else. And so there's getting somebody out of Germany to go to the Mount Holland Society, one suspects was non-trivial. And so the question is, how did that happen? They were only able to get one German out. And so was it Hayek's hand? Was it Robbins' hand? And I just sort of suspected, my intuition tells me that Robbins had a hand, because he had connections at the highest levels of British government that Hayek did.
Well, and Ware seemed to think it wasn't Hayek.
Yeah.
We asked him about that.
Yeah.
He didn't know about that.
Yeah, right. So Ware doesn't see anything. Ware doesn't see anything from the European side or from the continental side. He doesn't see anything from the British side. He sees a lot from the American side. So he knows who wrote how the money came to get the American contingent over. The sort of question of how Huygens got there. We don't know. And you're right. We didn't actually ask him about the Mount Helena Society debates, except this sort of funny things that came up about you should have seen Mises before he got married.
Well, let me thank you all for sticking around for the 21st paper, actually.
Oh my God.
The 10 Summer Institute. It's been wonderful. You've been a great audience.
Thank you
This is
to
very
David
much
and Sandra.
work.
Thank you.